Warm welcome to Politics Today, and in this programme we'll be discussing the controversy around supplying Ukraine with offensive military technology to actually take the war to Russia, and we'll be assessing British foreign policy as our new Foreign Secretary David Lammy is outlining the biggest priority facing this government now is to deal with climate change rather than the geo-strategic threats that we face from China, Iran or North Korea. And in this programme today I'm joined by Major General Tim Cross, CBE, together with David Hews, Prayer for Parliament. So gentlemen, warm welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Simon.
And it's great to see you here as well, Tim, and it's such a privilege and an honour for us to have you on the programme. But do you want to remind our viewers why it's so important as Christians we support our Christians serving right across armed forces, whether it's the Army, the Navy or the Royal Air Force, and how much we need to support them and very much keep them in our prayers?
Yeah, well, I served for 43 years, man and boy, so it was a long time. And I became a Christian halfway through that process, really, when I was a captain. But having people praying for us is something that's been really important to me and indeed to my wife. And that's one of the key issues, really, recognising that, a lot of people are working in difficult and dangerous jobs and doing all sorts of, tough stuff. But the military are away a lot, away from their families a lot. And of course, when they're on operational deployment, a lot of uncertainty for the families that are behind and the dangers that they're in at the time. And also, I think, being part of an organisation that is very firmly, in inverted commas, under command of the government decide what we will or will not do. And sometimes there are tough choices that are being made, and we have to work our way through that and deliver as best we can. The military will never solve the problems around the world, but we also try to establish a secure environment in which politics and economics works and so on. But that can be tough, and you see some pretty tough things. I've watched the mass graves being dug up. I've seen the brutal things that people do to each other around the world. And so praying for people's hearts to be soft and not be hardened by what they see, and intellectually that they're challenged but nonetheless can stay firm and stable. PTSD and things like that are a reality. So there's lots to pray for. And I know the Christians in the MOD across the board in all three services really appreciate what people do for us.
Well, we really value them because they do protect the defence of the realm. If it wasn't for armed forces, we wouldn't have a nation. So we're in gratitude for the incredible service provided by Christians in armed forces. So thank you for representing them, Tim. And it's great to see you, David, as well. I know that you've previously had naval experience, so the only representative we don't have on this programme today is the RAF. But share with us the important work that you're doing, David, through Prayer for Parliament, particularly the greatest challenge now probably facing your ministry and those involved in Prayer for Parliament is having the most secular parliament in our nation's history.
Yeah, Prayer for Parliament's still going strong. The problem has been recently is that the last general election literally took supports from under our feet, in the sense that the MP who oversaw us was Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, and he's busy sorting out court cases in Northern Ireland. So he had to step down before the election. And then Fiona Bruce was going to step in, and she lost the election. And we lost quite a few born-again, spirit-filled Christians who were really close working with us. But despite that, it's given us more of the oomph to get in there and to stand in the gap. And I think really the enemy thinks he's pulling it down, but in fact we're moving to a higher level, and that's where we want to be.
Excellent. And Tim, we have a new government in place. What is your assessment in terms of the Labour government's approach to the defence of the realm, which is their approach to our armed forces and protection for this nation?
Well, in some ways, of course, it's a bit early to say. They've only been in power a very short time. But I think the current Defence Secretary, John Healey, is a capable guy. I've met him and I like him. And I think the Strategic Defence Review that they've just launched, with him heading with him asking George Robertson to head it up with 2 or 3 people that I know very well who are going to be on assisting George Robertson. So that's, it's a good sign. I think that was right. Interestingly, it's called a Strategic Defence Review and not a Strategic Defence and Security Review, which the previous reviews have been for quite some time now. And frankly, I think that's a mistake. But nonetheless, they are going to look at that and hopefully produce something sensible at the end of it. They have, of course, we only spend around 2 a little bit over 2% of our GDP on defence, and the previous government were quite clear they wanted to spend more, 2.5% by 2030. A lot of people were saying that's probably not enough, and people are now talking about 3% in the context of what's going on in places like Ukraine, which we'll come back to. And the current government has said they will increase to 2.5%, but only when they can afford it. So that brings up the question, okay, so where is defence in the priority of all these other things that, again, to be fair, any government has to face? But there is a danger that people mouth the issue that security is the number one issue for any government. And if that is a reality with all that's going on, then I would hope that they would, they'd reach that milestone a lot earlier than I sense is going to be the case.
Excellent. Appreciate that. And David, what are your thoughts on the front page story that appeared on the Sunday Times? And I'll just read out the headline. It says, "Go it alone and let Ukraine fire missiles," PM told. The context of this story is that the Ukrainians are asking to take the war from a defensive war where they're fighting Russian forces on their own soil to take the war to Russia and actually attack Russia on its own soil using British supplied missiles. What are your thoughts on the controversy, and should the Ukrainians be allowed to take on the Russians on Russian soil?
It would be great if we didn't have to do it on our own, but since we've supplied the missiles, at the moment, there are so many missiles that have been supplied to Russia, and they're firing them into Ukraine. I feel that we should allow Ukraine to use our missiles. For example, if I was on a ship, and I have been in a front line before now, if someone starts shooting at you, you're not going to sit there and say, wait a minute, we can only reply to the border and we can't actually go into your territory. You will actually fight and do it properly. Well, these missiles, all we're asking to do is say, we think Ukraine needs the right to be able to do exactly what Russia's doing to Ukraine, and that is to return the missiles into Russia and sort out the problem. I know there's a threat from Putin, but is he pulling our bluff or not? I don't know.
Yeah. And Tim, what is your assessment of the current war in Ukraine and this growing frustration by President Zelensky that he can't take the war to Russia because the Americans and NATO are saying don't?
Yeah, well, I think just to pick up on that, on David's point, in a war like this, you have three areas, if you like. One is the close battle, which is where people are fighting in inverted commas on the front line, plus or minus 10, 20 miles of the front line. And we've been supporting Ukraine in their ability to do that. We've been training their soldiers at the tactical level. We've been providing various, capabilities over this last couple of years. But then there's the rear battle, which is about how you maintain your lines of communication, you sustain your operations, and you run your logistic bases, your infrastructure, and so on, and so forth. And then there's what we call the deep battle. And the deep battle is the equivalent of the enemy's rear, if you like. And not being able to attack in the deep battle is a serious limitation. And what's been happening over the last couple of years, for reasons we can come back to, and in some cases understandable reasons, politicians and so forth have been reluctant to see this war escalate. They've been trying to contain it. They don't want to end up with a major conflict with Russia. But I don't know whether this is a fair example, but some of the listeners may know, back in 1940, when we were standing alone against Germany, America gave us what was called Lend-Lease. They gave us a lot of equipment, but they didn't give it to us. We had to pay for it, and we didn't stop paying for it till about 20 years ago. So it cost us an awful lot of money. But my point is that when they gave us that equipment to enable us to continue to fight, they didn't say, and oh, by the way, you can't attack Germany with this equipment. I mean, it would have been a ridiculous thing to say. And in the context of what we're talking about, holding Zelensky with one arm behind his back, stopping him from striking deep into Russia, therefore disrupting their lines of communication, their logistics, their command and control centers, their infrastructure and so on, is a serious limitation. So over this last couple of years, we've drip-fed our ability, Ukraine's ability to conduct this fight. They've fought brilliantly, and their moral component is very, very high. But they are struggling, and thus far they've been able to hold the line to a degree, but they're not going to be able to win this war if we continue to constrain them, in my view.
I mean, looking into the political considerations of what you just said, firstly, we have Biden and the Democrats are seeking re-election in November. They don't want to risk a wider conflict. But if we are actually seen to be aiding the Ukraine to actually take the war into Russian territory, isn't that saying that NATO is now officially at war with Russia, and so therefore Russia can say in its defence, there's nothing stopping us from targeting NATO? Is that seems to be the line of the political argument?
Well, there's certainly that is a view. There's no doubt about that. And to be fair, countries like Germany and Italy and France and the Baltic states, see some of this differently than we do. We're a bit further away from that close battle. But nonetheless, the bottom line is Ukraine has now got a salient around the Kursk area. They are in Russian territory, using equipment that we have given them in the past. They've been striking Crimea with Storm Shadow and other long-range weapon systems for quite a long time. From a Russian perspective, Crimea is Russia. It's part of Russia. So in that sense, there's nothing new here. Clearly, there is a concern that Putin will, raise the ante. People worry about tactical nuclear weapons. They worry about other things too. But I just, at the end of the day, you have to make a choice. And in my view, from a military point of view, this is a no-brainer. And even from a political point of view, I think it's a no-brainer because we cannot allow Putin to succeed here. We have to give Ukraine the ability to take the fight to Putin. And if nothing else, force him to the negotiating table.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much. And David, what are your thoughts on the advice of 5 former ministers of defence, and including Boris Johnson, to Keir Starmer, to actually supply these British missiles to actually target Russia within Russian territory to try and bring a swift end to this war?
No, I'm with them as well, and I think any retired or ex-military person would be saying the same, as would the military people. And all I was thinking about is, a lot of people say, oh, we need peace, this, that and the other. The Bible is full of battles and wars. I mean, it's been going since God created the earth, and there's nothing new about it. And also, the end time says there will be wars and rumours of wars. So it's no surprise that something is going to escalate probably to a higher level. But no, we should be backing up the military, and the politicians should test whether Putin means it or not, and let's see what happens.
Tim, how do you think this war in Ukraine is going to end? Because I mean, it's a geo-strategic war that really does pit the West against Russia. Ukraine is also the breadbasket of the world, which means that there's been world food shortages, energy shortages as well because of this war. What do you think is going to take for this war to come to an end?
Well, I have to say, I don't know, and it's difficult, but I think in the end it will end up with a negotiated settlement. It has to be some sort of... I can't honestly see Russia walking away from this. I don't think Putin's going to walk away from it, and I know there are people who would hopefully suggest that Putin may be overthrown and so on, but I just can't see that happening, and I can't see him walking away from this. So Ukraine, I think, has to do the things we've been talking about, show it's capable of holding the line, gain territory where it can, and in the end, I think there'll have to be some sort of negotiated settlement. Now, that's easy for me to say. It's not my home that's been given up in the Donbass, or whatever else they would have to negotiate over. And it's difficult to know what the negotiation would look like. Zelensky is quite clear. Both sides are quite clear, actually. Putin is still saying they want to take the whole of Ukraine, all the way back to Odessa. And President Zelensky is saying we want to retake all the lost territory, including Crimea. Now, I just don't think either of those two things are possible. Now, what would that negotiated settlement look like? Would it be a Korean Peninsula type negotiated settlement with division between North and South, which is still not peace? I mean, it's still, still disputed. Or would it bring about some sort of clarity? If it did, the latter, would anybody believe that Russia's just going to stop at that point, or would they worry that in 4 or 5 years' time they're going to have another go? And that is the problem here. So I don't honestly know what the answer is. I think this is going to be going on for quite a long time. We could be here in another year or two having the same conversation. I think in the end it will end up with a negotiated settlement. That will only come about if we continue to give Ukraine the ability to sustain and continue the fight until that comes about.
Tim, don't you think we should have stepped in when Crimea was taken over? We just, by sitting back and letting him do it, it opened the doors, didn't it?
Well, I mean, history is replete with what we should have done.
No, absolutely.
And other things too in the run-up to it.
And David, as a part of the prayer for Parliament and involved with intercessors, how should our viewers be praying and interceding regarding the situation in Ukraine and, of course, the war as well?
Simple prayer is, Lord, let your will be done in this country or on this planet as it is in heaven. The Lord's Prayer says it all. That's one of the prayers we do a lot of. We do pray for the Parliament to make the right decisions. Intercession is so important, but you've got to actually believe. It's got to be a prayer that comes from your heart and you believe in it, and just trust in God, because He knows what's going on in Ukraine. He knows what's going on in Russia. We just have to trust in Him.
Absolutely. After all, history is His story. And Tim, what are your thoughts on this incredible announcement made by our new Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, that he said the greatest threat to the UK is climate change, not the war on terror, and this includes geo-strategic threats from Russia, China, North Korea, and the Islamic Republic of Iran, that climate change is a bigger threat to the UK than these rogue totalitarian regimes?
Yeah, it's an interesting announcement, isn't it? I mean, to some degree, you can understand what he's getting at here. Climate change long term could have a serious impact in the whole world, clearly. Whether it will affect us, the UK, as well, it certainly won't affect us, the UK, as badly as it will affect places like Africa and other places around the world. But these are not the same things. I mean, this is a values-based assessment of how we need to support what's going on around the world in terms of doing what we can to ameliorate climate change, if not reverse what's going on. Military operations against terrorism, against Islamic fundamentalism, against what Russia's doing, against the potential for what China may or may not get up to, for what's happening in the Middle East and so on. These are not instead of, they are part of the world we're living in now. And we need to be prepared and capable of engaging in those conflicts, as best we can when called upon to do so. So I don't dismiss what David Lammy is saying. Climate change is a serious issue, but I just don't think it's right to say, and the implication is that's where we're going to spend our money. We're not going to spend our money on normal, in inverted commas, defence capability. And interestingly, it plays back to what I said earlier. If you have a security and a defence and security review, climate change is clearly an issue for security in the wider sense. And I, again, find myself wondering why they've changed the nomenclature from an SDSR to an SDR. And there may be something in that I may not like when it begins to appear.
And David, what do you make of this growing prospect of war that we're facing? And we've already seen this emergence of what is known as now the axis of resistance. This is growing lines between Russia, China, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and North Korea against the West. Even many military analysts talking about the prospect that we could be facing World War III, and yet David Lammy has prioritised climate change as a bigger focus for the UK government in terms of foreign policy, rather than countering these geostrategic threats. Your thoughts?
While you're on that, I think David Lammy's missing a thing. He should be focusing on this battle and war aspect before we get onto the bit about all this going on in the East. The fact that he's restricting the arms going to Israel, as I said to my Labour MP, the problem is he's falling into the hands of Genesis chapter 12 verse 3, which says those that curse Israel will be cursed and those that bless Israel will be blessed. And this government's going down that route. Now read the other thing. The concern is we need to get our forces into the eastern area. We're stretched at all things. Okay, we've got one aircraft carrier, the Queen Elizabeth, which is taking a group out to the China seas, but thank God, Lord, that we do have 2 aircraft carriers, but we're short of frigates. I'm only pleased that the Minister of Defence has actually approved the building of the Type 31 frigates. He hasn't cut back on it, but we still need more. And I'm sure Tim would say they need more troops on the ground in the army. we've missed it. They've let all the defence cut back too far, and we need to review on it.
Yeah. And Tim, how will our enemies be reading and making note of this policy announcement by David Lammy in the Foreign Office that our main foreign policy objective is to deal with climate change? How will this go down in Moscow? How will this go down in Tehran? How will this go down in Beijing?
Well, one of my great quotes that I use often is Sun Tzu. If you understand the enemy and understand yourself, you need not fear the outcome of 1,000 battles. Understanding Russia, China and their reaction to all of this is not easy, but I would think that they are, in inverted commas, pleased that we may end up by putting a lot more resources into those sort of issues rather than in inverted commas, pure defence. There's a broader issue here, which is about what is Western civilization about today? I mean, we don't want to get stuck into this too deeply, but if you remember Fukuyama at the end of the Cold War talking about the fact that the whole world would become free and liberal and democratic.
End of history, he said, wouldn't he?
The end of history. And of course, the counter to that was Huntington, and Huntington talked about the fact that there were other civilizations that would emerge, and we in the West would be increasingly under pressure. And a lot of the institutions that we put in place in 1944, 45, and in the post-war years, like the UN, like the World Bank and so forth. And that's a reality that's happening now. Western civilization is not going to end up by the whole world looking like us in the near future anyway. And people like President Obama talk about the arc of history, and maybe that will be the case in decades, 100 years time. But where we are today, people like Russia, Putin, and President Xi and others, North Koreans, Iran, and so forth, genuinely believe that the West is crumbling, that we're losing our sense of what we were, which is solidly Judeo-Christian foundations. Christendom, the Western civilization used to be called Christendom. So I think they'll be looking at this and actually will not be unhappy about it. Now, again, to be fair, China is spending huge amounts of money and resources on climate change. They're building huge quantities of solar panels and indeed within China itself doing a lot about this. So it's not an issue that they're ignoring, but it comes back to what is your focus today, and are you capable of dealing with that broader long-term strategic issue and the current defence issues that we're talking about.
Absolutely. And David, the other prospect is that, I don't think we've ever been closer to a nuclear confrontation than we have since the Cold War. So the climate change is an important issue, but if the Russians launch a nuclear weapon, or if China launches a nuclear weapon, or the Iranians are very close to developing nuclear weapons, having that nuclear weapons capabilities, and the prospect of them launching nuclear weapons, then it makes a whole joke of the whole thing to do with climate change. So surely the government's priority should be non-proliferation and dealing with the kind of nuclear threats, rather than saying our priority is climate change, which is a luxury, because not all countries are abiding to all the legislation and the rules around climate change.
Yeah, you're right, because Iran is definitely wanting to get a nuclear capability, and if that happened, anything could happen. But we just need to pray for God's protection over this nation. We need to wake this nation up. This is a time, as things get more heated, that we as Christians need to stand up and pray more for this nation, particularly for it to turn its back to Jesus and ask the Lord to deal with the non-godliness that's been going on. Everything's crumbling around us. Everybody needs Jesus, and they need to be telling people about it. We need to be coming out more and spreading the word. The end times are here.
Absolutely. And Tim, from your vast military experience and know-how, how as Christians should we be praying into this situation? Because, Paul tells us in the New Testament that we are to pray for our governments and those in authority, that we would live peaceful lives. Yeah,
he does. And, the Bible is very clear that those people are in power there because God's put them there.
Exactly.
And as you look around the world, you do wonder. In the great, again, look at this in the broad sense. However we see the fall of what happened in the Garden of Eden, the bottom line for me anyway is that essentially Adam and Eve said to the good Lord, we'll make our own decisions, thank you very much. Don't tell us what we can eat or don't eat, or et cetera, et cetera. And we're living with the consequences of that. We live in a fallen world where evil is a reality, and it's out there. We see that all the time. And in these regimes that are certainly not have the same value system as us, and we are finding ourselves in a difficult world. I think we need to be careful about saying Third World War is around the corner and the end times are coming here now and so forth, because the end times are going to happen over the last 2,000 years. Lots of people thought that, and particularly World War I, World War II, and so on. But there's a real danger of what you've referred to. Iran has been giving these missiles to Russia, and there's a very clear indication that Russia will have been giving them some nuclear technology in return for that. And if Iran does end up with a nuclear weapon, I don't think there's any doubt at all Saudi Arabia and some of the other Middle East countries will want it, and they will get that technology from, I don't know, places like Pakistan and others. So non-proliferation is a really important issue. Now, we're not going to do away with nuclear weapons. And the reality is that there's a lot more countries that have nuclear weapons today than was the case, even probably 30 years ago. But we do need to take that issue very, very seriously. And we do need to recognize, when we talk about how to pray, my response to that is always that we need to pray for our leaders who are in place. They're the people that are there, our political leaders as well as our military leaders and others. We need to pray for wisdom. The great prayer that Solomon prayed when he was a youngster, for wisdom. Now, Solomon in the end, doesn't get it all right by any manner of means, but we rightly have conversations and discussions and can be critical of our leadership, but we must always uphold them in our prayers. And we must pray that, particularly for our Christians in Parliament, in both the House of Commons and the House of Lords, that they will engage in these conversations and be prepared to speak into them. And there are lots of other issues we could talk about in that context.
Excellent. Tim, you've got my vote if you want to stand for Parliament. I think you may be a great member of Parliament.
I'm far too old for that.
But thank you, Tim and David, for being my guests on this week's Politics Day. Done a great job. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. The geostrategic threats to this country are incredibly grave, with the growing threats emerging from China, Russia, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and also North Korea. And we need to remind our government of these threats so that they are prepared for them, and they prepare our military for the defence of the realm, because this is the first job of any government, to actually protect the nation, and this is imperative. But we also need to keep our political leaders in our prayers, that they would have wisdom and understanding and live in a godly manner that would all have an impact on us. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.